tardes a todos. Mi nombre es Marco
Good
Frieri.
afternoon, everyone. My name is Marco Fieri. I'm a student of Masters of Global Affairs and Security, and if I am part of the Colombian Studies group of the university. Before we begin the presentations, I'd want to clear up how the event works. After this, please, whoever is here, if you're a participant, please turn off your camera and mute your mics so the transmission can be only focused on the speakers. Also, if you have any question, please leave them in the chat. She will organize the questions at the end of the event. And finally, for those interested in English translation, in the bottom part of Zoom, you will see an option that says interpretation. When you click, there will be a menu, and it will give you the option of the language. If you click on English, you'll be able to hear the audio in English. It would be translated by Yuri Orozco, who is the translator of the event. If you have any other questions, you may write directly to me through the chat or through this chat, and we will resolve any issues.
Good afternoon, my name is Marco Frieri. I'm a student of the Masters of Global Affairs at FIU. I'm part of the Colombian Study Group. Before starting, I wanted to clear up some house rules. After this, please, I need everyone close your cameras and put yourselves on mute. So the only people in the transmission that you can see will be the presenters. Any questions, please send them directly to Diana Ramirez via the Zoom chat so we can organize them at the end. We'll present them. Whoever wants to use the original language is going to be in Spanish, but we have a translation option. At the bottom of the Zoom screen, we're going to have the option to click on interpretation. When you click on that, drop-down menu will appear. And if you select English, you'll be able to hear the presentation in English, which will be done by Yuri Orozco, our translator for this event. Again, any questions, feel free to reach out to me through the chat. Thank you.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gloria Lopera Mesa. I am a student, a doctorate student in History of Florida International University and Vice President of the Colombian Studies Group, Chapter FIU. Colombian Studies Group started in the year 2010 with the purpose of gathering students, academics, and activists of the Colombian diaspora in the United States in a space of interdisciplinary dialogue with an inter-American perspective, critical and progressive. Initially, CSG gathered students from the University of New York. The group has expanded. Beginning this year, 2 chapters were created, one in Albuquerque with the University of New Mexico, and the other in the south of Florida, launched from the FIU. This event is precisely the launch of our FIU chapter of Colombia Studies Group. It is our goal to create a space in which students and Colombian academics and Colombians of other nationalities that live in South Florida participate in conversations that would help us comprehend the reality of our country and contributing from here so we can have a positive transformation. In particular, we are interested in linking new generations, Colombians that came to this country at a very young age that were born here and have Colombian parents, so that they may find in CSG a space strengthen their links to Colombia. Many of these young people communicate more fluidly in English than in Spanish. And for that reason, this event will provide simultaneous translation, taking into the account the suggestion of Miriam Ramirez and Tatiana Gomez, 2 of our youngest members of the board of CSG FIU. I want to take advantage at this time to thank Diana Ramirez, president of CSG FIU, and PhD in history student for accepting leadership of the student organization. Professor Victor Uribe, who supports us as academic advisor of the group, Marco Ferreri, master student in global affairs, who introduced the event and has contributed tremendously in building this organization, particularly this event, and Milena Gutierrez, who came from New York to Fort Lauderdale and encouraged us to create an FIU chapter to expand CSG to the south of Florida. On behalf of all of us, I'd like to thank Yuri Orozco, who has generously given us her time and working with us to make the translation of this event possible. Judy was born in Colombia and has lived her entire life in the United States. She studied interpreting and translation at NYU and works for Kings County Criminal Court for the past 4 years. She's passionate about her dogs, her job, and topics on human rights, and is an enthusiastic member and volunteer of CSG. I'd like to thank our guests, Diana Lopez Zuleta, Alejandra Miller, and Helena Urán-Bidegaín for their presence at this inaugural event. Also, Michelle Harbs, who is accepted in leading this dialogue with our guests at this inaugural event. Michelle is a lawyer at the Universidad de los Andes with a master's in psychosocial approaches for building peace cultures. She's currently holding a role of researcher of the Commission of Truth, working on the chapter of Colombians living abroad. I say farewell to you all, thanking everyone that is with us in this event through Zoom and Facebook Live. I'd like to remind you all that you may ask questions through the chat. And I am leaving you now with Michelle. Thank you. Thank you, Gloria. Good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you're communicating from. First of all, I'd like to thank the Colombian Studies Group for inviting me to moderate this space today. And I'd like to thank the support from the Commission of Truth through the purposes of interviews to the people who were forced to leave Colombia because of the armed conflict and found protection or refugee in the United States. Not all of these people have a piece of the truth of that war. And just by gathering together all the voices, we are able to comprehend completely of what has happened to us. I am very honored to have this conversation with our 3 guests today, who are women that are very strong, who have understood the processes of searching for the truth, and very important and significant for our country. And I would like to introduce you guys to them. First of all, we have the Commissioner of Truth, Alejandra Miller, from the Commissioner of Truth of Colombia, who also leads the group of work of genders, and with amongst various other topics. The commissioner is leader of the movement in Colombia. She's an economist. She's also studying political science. She's a researcher and in the university, and she is part of the Pacific Route of Women. After that, we have Diana Lopez, who is a social communicator and journalist specializing in public opinion and in the political arena. And she has done a big research with regards to the assassination of her father. She will tell us in a few about that. And that ended in having her first book, What the Desert Did Not Erase, to which she won a national recognition for being a journalist. And last but not least, we have Helena Urán-Bidegaín, who is a political science major, linguist, studies in Latin American studies. She has developed professionally in several arenas in several countries. And she also wrote a book that is titled My Life in the Palace, where she tells us about her investigation of the assassination of her father in the siege on the Palace of Justice in 1985. So thank you very much, all 3 of you, for being here with us in this dialogue. And we will begin. So without the methodology of the dialogue, I will have a few questions that will be for all the 3 guests so we can talk about the topic. And then there will be others that will be specific for each and every one of you. And I will tell you how much time you will have to answer the questions. So I will start with the first question. And in this question, I will invite each and every one of our guests to answer. And so you can also say hi to everyone here. With the title of the dialogue today, the question for you all is, how have you lived the role as women, that role as women in the process of remembering and contributing to the search of the truth in the war? which has been a very masculine topic in Colombia. And there's a lot of talks on that, on the violence against women. And I want to start with the Commissioner of Truth, Alejandra Miller, she's also focused on the gender role. If you have 5 minutes each, let me know, please, if I should stop. Gloria will be taking time. Gloria, if you can let us know if they're taking too much time. Well, good afternoon, all. For me, it's an honor to be able to share this panel with Diana and Helena. Thank you so much, Michelle, for leading us here, and Colombian Studies Group, who has started this important topic for Colombians who are in exile today. I'd like to from various topics. One, my experience on how I lead that feminist movement for 20 years from a peace role in this country who has been hurt by war, and where women are specifically, and their memories and their remembrances and how they've sustained this country for years. So we can advance and we can continue to move forward. So I believe within that experience, you could say that the memory for women, or remembering with women, it's an instrument for multiple things. For example, it has been an instrument to heal, very, very strong, a very strong instrument to heal, to say, how can I remember, how remembering contributes to what they've told us in several places, taking off that burden of a painful experience, where they may share that with other women that have lived similar experiences. It helps to heal. But the memory has also been an instrument of denouncement, a very strong denouncement. The experience has shown us that through those processes and those experiences of telling and sharing their story, publish it, putting it in the museums of memory and in the media, in the public scenery, it has also contributed with denouncing of what has happened, and it's a very important instrument. It has contributed without a doubt to the justice and reparations. We've seen that now that we are in the Commission for Women and their organizations. They've been doing this for several years, and that's building on reports. For example, the Ministry of Justice and Reparations, through reports, where the Commission has 67 reports of organizations of women's and LGBT groups that have given their experiences and what they've gone through. So for the Commission, it's fundamental. Those reports are extremely important. It's very important for women also in remembering. It means breaking stereotypes, that women that should be silent, where women shouldn't talk about certain things, women that, for example, are fighting that. So not only we get our rights, but we can show the world of what happens. And I believe in that sense, there is a breakthrough in stereotypes and taking away that burden that we've been put on because of the silence of stereotypes. And I believe it's a deep way of women, so they may exercise themselves, being careful of the patriarchy who puts us in a place of being way too careful. There's a lot of difficulties in breaking that barrier when something is pushed on us. But with the war, we've also discovered that how that care has helped us in saving lives, has helped us in rebuilding that social norm. And I believe memory plays a fundamental piece here, because it contributes that we don't repeat history. That means that the women put their memories out there, their experiences out there in all of these spaces. And it helps that other people may know this story and that we may reflect upon, like we're doing today, so we don't repeat history. So I would like to end this with a phrase that I really think is important here. And I'd want to say it. A young woman said it in a Pacific route the other day that we were with her. She said that or she was reminding us, I should say, that remembering is very feminist and forgetting is very patriarchal. So for women in this country, exercising memory and exercising the portion of remembering is a big contribution to truth. And it's a big contribution to end the patriarchy. Thank you so much. Thank you, Alejandra. I want to go to Helena Duran, the same question for you and how your experience as a woman of constructing memory, how it works. Elena, we can't hear you. You're on mute. Okay, now we can hear you. Great. I want to say that I'd like to begin with a citation from anthropologist Rita Segato, where she says that you have to dismantle the masculinity mandate in order to put an end to war. And yes, history tells us that it has always been women who suffer the most, along with their children, the effects of war that men usually start. And women are the ones who are there to recover all the pieces that are left after those battles, and also to ask for justice. And there's a lot of examples at a worldwide level. If you remember pictures of the Second World War, for example, in Germany, there are women who are picking up the pieces of buildings that were destroyed, or for example, grandmothers of the Plaza Majuska looking for their grandchildren that were stolen. There's always that part of women who are seeking truth and justice. And I don't know, I believe that it has to do with, Alejandra was saying, women, because it has been given to them a space, a family space has directly been given to them to care for everyone else. They are the ones who care about the abandoned child, the orphan, the sick, the ones that teach. So they're more proactive when it comes to solidarity. Women are essential for families to work, and that sensitivity, it doesn't mean that men don't have it or that women have it just by nature, but because of that condition, because of social constructs and the system, this is how it works. And I believe that it gives them more, I want to repeat myself, it's not that we just have it by nature, but the conditions that in the way we were raised, but that women, it's easier for them to investigate and research on their past. And I was looking at an article the other day from an author, I believe he was Brazilian, that it was the title, it was Breaking Stereotypes, because now in it's his novel about his dead daughter. And I was like, what book of mourning have I read? And it's usually written by women. Piedad Bonet, there's another lady, Michelle, I can't remember her name, Gentidioso, with the death of her husband. Women tend to investigate more when we tend to put on 800 masks and we don't show our vulnerability as if what was intimate isn't political. I believe, whatever we have is related to everything else, and that ends up damaging everything else. Yeah, I believe women have a tendency to confront their past, and yeah. Aside from that, remembering and the story has been something that has been dominated history by men, because they're the ones who usually present the stories because they've been in power. So history is usually told by the one that is hunting instead of the lion. That's why what we learn in school is World War I, II, III, the border, the one that happened here and there. They never really show historical figures as women. They usually show men at the front lines, being that wars and the impacts of wars, we are the ones who live that in a stronger way. So I believe it's very valuable, the voice of women in these spaces, because, and aside from that, they have a lot of power, and I mean power in the sense that reivindicate and resistance, not the power to impose or to dominate the other, but it's more a power, a healing power, reconciliating power, connection power, as opposed to that power that destroys and steps on other people. And yes, and I believe that because of that, yeah, women have to have, we have to listen to them more, because this is how we can start dialogues. And I see that with my book, how my book has connected with a whole bunch of people, individuals, that the story of the siege on the Palace of Justice, they wouldn't really tell them the entire truth. It was something, because it occurred such a long time, but through this story, my personal story, people are able to connect more, and that's why it's so valuable to have these memories and the voice of women in order to be able to confront war. Thank you so much, Helena. We want to end with the same question for Diana. Hi, thank you all for this invitation from Colombian Studies Group. I am very happy to be here. First of all, I believe, to begin, I come from a zone that is a very patriarchal, and there's a lot of machismo, which is La Guajira, the zone of Guajira in Colombia, where men, they tend to have weapons, or they, a few, very recently, they used to have a weapon in that region. Women were the, men were the ones making justice or bringing justice. Women were just pushed to doing all the domestic duties or the home duties. But in this story that has to do with the assassination of my dad, the killing of my dad, it was women who denounced the murderer. It's to say, women were the ones who went to the district attorney's office, and they were able to confront the attorney, file a report. And I believe the role of women was super important. I was able to say that in this case, and in the case of women and memory and remembering, what memories is that what justice cannot ignore. And for that, I want to piggyback on what Helena said. With regards to men, they are the ones who go to war, and women are the ones who seek justice, and who they also suffer because they were so pushed to doing all the home duties. And then when they lose their husband, they are left at nothing. Everyone believes that you have to forget and move on. It's like a sort of a routine of forgetting and moving forward, and that you have to be silent. That justice, for the most part, should be understood as something as of revenge, but you cannot. We cannot continue on that path. In the case of Helena, and in my case, we wrote books with regards to the story and the assassination of our fathers in times where it was very different from what it is now. And these are stories that are, in Colombia, there's thousands of stories like this, thousands of murders and killings. But at the end of the day, the numbers, they don't move people. These numbers are so cold. The news is not what happened, it's the suffering. We are the ones that had that suffering. It's not just the blood, it's those who are also left behind to face their memories. And that in this case, writing these stories is also a form of resistance to forgetting what happened, and a form of revealing, revolting yourself to that armed conflict.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Diana.
Ahora vamos a pasar como un momento en el que les
Now
voy
we
a
are going
hacer
to
algunas
move on to questions for each and every one of you. And at this round, I'm going to start with Helena Urán. Helena, for many of us that are listening and who does not know about your book, can you tell us a little bit of how this chapter of your life, of the armed conflict where you tell us in your book, and how was it to remember this from exile? I work for the Commission of Truth in this group from which we're picking up testimonies and people who looked for refugee status in other countries and who have a part of this truth, but this experience of being outside in exile, we find that it's really painful and that we have a lot of questions of identity. So how has your experience been with regards to that? Well, because I prepared myself for the translation, and I want to thank the translator once again for this job that they're doing. Can you guys hear me? Yes. This translation that is being done without any interest whatsoever. It's going to be a little difficult for me, but I will try to read what I had prepared. I normally speak without my notes. All right, let me begin. So I don't lose my train of thought. All right, so the book that I wrote is called My Life in the Palace, and it is a story in the chapter of A Story in Colombia where there was a censorship. I will talk about of the censorship from the Palace of Justice, the Supreme Court of Colombia. And what happened in November of 1985 when a group of MS-19 with 35 members, they took over the Supreme Court and the Council of State to force the magistrates to have a trial to the president, who was at time, Mr. Betancourt, because they considered that this government had not complied with these peace agreements that they had agreed to a year before in 1984. So they saw that the government was not, they were committing treason against the country. So they believed that by entering the building, that the magistrates, because of their quality of being judges of the republic, as they took these hostages, the government would listen to their call in order to have a dialogue with the guerrilla, the armed groups. So they thought that the media was going to come, nationals and international media groups, they were going to come and cover this trial, and they would come out on air, and that they would be like the defensors of the common good, and they would be able to, show what they were demanding, and showing that the government had not complied with the agreements, etc. So they had a series of points that they wanted to bring about. So what happened was that the military got there right away. They entered, MS-19 entered, and a few minutes later, a whole military operation arrived, like a war, like if it was Iraq. And there were more than 500 soldiers, and you start to add all of the members of battalions, troops, and all that. I don't even know like the real names, but if you were to take everyone into account, it was over 5,000. And we were talking about 35 armed groups. It was very disproportionate. They got there with, helicopters, snipers. It was a war right away. And it lasted 6th, 7th, and 8th of November. And they began shooting from outside. They entered the war tank inside the building. And the employees of there were four floors in the building. The first floors were able to get out, evacuate, the majority. Third and fourth floors, the people that were there, it was very difficult for them to get out. And a lot of them died because of the crossfire and also the fire that was started. And at the end, there was almost 100 people that were dead as a result of this, and 11 people that were that disappeared. In this case, we haven't been able to clarify that. It was never explained why they took off the guards that were at the building. There were usually guards. That day, there were no guards. Or who had told them to go away. It was never explained why the army got there with the tanks in less than an hour to the building, knowing that where they were coming from, where these tanks were coming from, it would have taken them more than an hour to reach the Supreme Court. So it was never explained also how the offices, how they were able to take away only the brother of the president out of his office and the wife of the minister of justice. That did, they went there and they took those individuals out. The rest of them, they didn't. The ones that were able to get out, they did so on their own. But there's no explanation as far as who started the fire inside the building and why the president did not come to the president of the Court of Justice, who was imploring to him to stop the fire. He didn't come to the phone. The media never also exposed the issue of censorship that the government had started. They censored what was happening live. They weren't allowing any interviews. People were disconnected and confused of what was happening. And after that, the media, journalists, there's always exceptions when it comes to that. But instead of investigating, they dedicated themselves to repeat the official version that the armed groups that was paid by drug lords had come into the building in order to burn out those files that were related to extradition trials and extradition cases. But what they never told us was who started the fire and who burned those files. And also that was benefiting the army because there are open cases with militaries because they have violated human rights. That part was never talked about. It was swept under the rug. Colombia has from a lot of history of previous government where there was torture and several human rights violations. And that was like, let's put something under the rug and let's exalt something else. And that's why we were talking a lot about memories. Powerful people that are in power usually tell the story. And there's a whole bunch of things there that were never told. And that in my book, I try and expose without more thinking that people have the right to be informed. People have a right to be informed, and they have their own way of making their own judgments. And obviously that there's a whole bunch of things in this story that we still need to share, but I am surprised that there's a whole bunch of people that tell me something like, hey, they would have never imagined that the army had some sort of own, personal interest in this that happened. Let's always think about who wins in each war. What are the interests in war? And then that's when we start to understand it better. So the country has lived, unfortunately, half-truths, and it's still happening now. In the case of my father, it was 22 years later that we were able to find out that it was the army who had tortured him and then executed him. And he never died inside the Supreme Court as we thought in the crossfire. They also tried to make his body disappear. And even though there's a conviction with the Inter-American Court of Justice, the case is stuck because those who are in power are the ones who are always in power or have always been in power. There hasn't been any responsibility, or anyone hasn't taken any responsibility from one side or the other. Nobody has complied with responsibility or taking responsibility for the death of my father. Nobody has paid for the death of my father. And with regards to the exile and migration, I personally do believe that it helped me to come close to that story because it was very, very difficult. I was blocked. I was in shock for many years because of the fact that I had to leave Colombia and I had to, you know, there was no grandparents, there was no cousins, there wasn't immediate families. We couldn't talk about it. So it made it harder. But at the same time, it allowed me to come close to writing. I just didn't know I was going to be attacked so severely or that I would be intimidated because of writing my story. And I remember I mentioned this to Diana recently that in a conversation that I had with Mario Guaran when he came out as the Attorney General, he told me that us, my family and I, those that are asking for justice for the Supreme Court justice case, we're not encountering the mafia or drug lords. We are encountering the most dangerous individuals. And that for me was an eye-opener. It was a strong statement because, anyway. So the distance and being in Germany, who has also been working on their paths with the Nazi war and the World War II and all that, it made me look at my own past and realize that, okay, I had to confront my past. It was a crime of state that happened, state crime, that I was a victim of political violence. And no matter how much I left to another country, it wasn't going to go away. It wasn't going to change my past. And I didn't want to have question my identity, but I have to speak because I need to transform that part of history. And I have to tell my story in order for that to happen. So exile for me has had those two faces. For on one end, the difficulty of coming close to that truth and then getting more instruments and trying to tell that truth because Colombia does not allow you to feel safe when you are telling your truth and not being fearful when you're telling the truth of what really happened. Thank you so much, Helena. And thank you because you were able to cover a lot of these topics in 10 minutes. I apologize if I was going a little fast. Thank you so much, Helena. I want to hand the mic over to Diana Lopez. Diana, in your book, you wrote in one of the chapters, you spoke the words of Diana Aldana, and I'm going to read it to you. It says, while justice does not become a form of memory, memory in and of itself can be a form of justice. So I'd like to know if you can tell us in your own story and in this process as well, if you can tell us a bit about the subject that you mentioned in that chapter of how you lived through this, how you went through this of remembering as a form of justice in your case, at least. Michelle, when I was in the process of writing the book, the poet Romana Alavlandiana was invited to Colombia at a literature event, and I was able to listen from her voice. She also helped us with the memory of what happened in her country, and that phrase really impacted me because I want to tell you something that I had never mentioned, and I had thought about using as a headline in my book. I was going to write this book so all the murders of the world can see how much pain they cause. But it turns out that in that journey, I found out that murders weren't going to realize what they did. First of all, there's that journey of pain where I talked about before. Everyone wants that us, the women, forget, and we cannot forget something that we don't even know what happened. So I believe that's the first thing. When remembering as a form of reparation, more than justice, in the case of my father, who I will tell you about, I will tell you what happened. There was justice, but I think the most important is that I say that in my book, what allowed me to dignify in order to have my dignity back was able to know the truth. And the truth I found out through my own means, doing the research on my own with regards to the assassination of my father. We are so used to violence that it's sometimes weird, it's sometimes uncomfortable to defend our own rights and ask for justice and truth. So everyone wants us to forget. And some people also even ask the victims than the victimees. We ask the victims to forget, to forgive when they don't even know what happened. So this comes as traumas and eternal pain because there's no truth, because there's no truth. Not only did they assassinate my father, but they want me to leave my dignity, the need to seek justice, and that same trauma made several episodes of my life more difficult. And some of them I tried to forget as a resource so I can survive, so I wouldn't feel pain. So the assassination of my father happened in the year 1997. I was at that time 10 years old. I grew up in part of Cesar, that is right next to La Guajira Peninsula in the northern part of Colombia, that you can say is the coast part of Colombia, or it is within that culture of the coast. At that time, it was a very violent time in Colombia. I grew up in a little town, very small village, where the absolute control was by the militaries of that region. There was a transition to the paramilitaries. So some way or the other, I grew up with that fear. For example, I was able to see like bombings. I was able to see as a child, not directly, but it was very normal for someone to be killed. But I never imagined that they would kill my father. My father was assassinated by the mayor of the town. And at that time, my father was running for mayor in Barrancas La Guajira. And he was a councilman. He was also filing reports against the mayor for corruption, and he was assassinated. His death was it was left in impunity for many years because no one was able to file a report against the mayor. Then he came back and he ran for mayor again. He took the paramilitaries to the area of La Guajira in Colombia. He created in this totalitarian type of government. The police, the army was at his service to assassinate people, and whoever would come across his way or try to stop him would be assassinated. Whoever would, go to the police against him, they would end up killed. He ended up being governor of the Guajira region in Colombia. And being a governor, he sent out people to get assassinated. It's a story that it's terrifying because no one had the courage to denounce him. But aside from that, society who was surrounding him, they worshiped this man. For example, in the year that my father was assassinated, he was given a prize as the best mayor by the Congress. Actually gave him that. The Universidad de La Guajira, the University of Guajira, gave him honors prize, and like the army would worship this guy, and it was he was so powerful. He created this huge mantra of power. You didn't know, how to detach yourself from that because, nobody was ever investigating anything. All the process of this was all archived. And right when I was mentioning recently that women had filed reports against him, two of these women that confronted him directly, it was an ex-mayor, a female ex-mayor who he had supported. Her name was Jandra Brito, and she didn't want to submit herself to what he was asking for economically because he wanted her to give him the mayor's office, the contracts and stuff like that. And he went and got her husband assassinated. She went through every means. She went through all of the district attorney's office. She went to Bogota, the capital of Colombia. She looked for journalist Gonzalo Ville so he could help her. And she then ended up assassinated. She was murdered. And she left 2 kids behind, orphans, that had also been adopted. So they became orphans twice. It was a horrible tragedy. And then another woman that tried to confront him was Chachi Hernandez, who was also assassinated. Let's say that the boss of whoever denounced him or condemned him, they ended up being killed. And the processes would, the law process would disappear. For example, my father's file was lost in a little town of Guajira because it was simply, they would say, we can't find it. And aside from that, there was not much information. All of the witnesses were afraid to testify, etc. So in a nutshell, in the year 2013, when he is the governor of La Guajira, his process comes to a district attorney of the Supreme Court. And Gonzalo Guillén, the journalist, denounces him, condemns him before the district attorney's office. And I find out that the district attorney is investigating him, and they form part of the investigation. So that's once again a woman that in some way is trying to condemn him and denounce him directly and a name, not as others who would do it in an anonymous way. Not only was I condemning him and denouncing, but I also helped the investigation of the district attorney's office. I was a witness, and I was a part of the civil process that was brought about because of the homicide of my father, to which he resulted convicted in 2017. So 40 years, which is the maximum penalty under the law, which he was judged. That was a process in and of itself, and it was long. I don't want to get too deep into that, but in the midst of that, I was victimized again. I was threatened. There was more difficult periods in my life where there was so much fear that my own family was against me. They turned against me because I got involved in this process, because the normal was that as women, we needed to be quiet and be silent and also as a form of protection. And they would say, hey, look how everyone else has ended. We're talking about over 100 homicides. You can also end up dead, which was the normal thing that would usually happen. And I decided to confront him directly. I went to all of the hearings. And as a journalist, I also made a few publications. And then I wrote the book when he was convicted. I dedicated myself to write books, not only for that, but also to ask several entities, public entities that have given him prizes, to withdraw those prizes, because it was a lack of respect with the victims that man would have all these recognitions when he in fact was a murderer. So, he was convicted. He was convicted for 6 homicides and 2 because he had worked with the paramilitary and Marco Fierro, but he's still in prison as a king in prison. It's incredible because he is in prison in a place where there's public servants, like if his crime had to do with public functions and not as as the killer that he is. He had a gang. He was sending people to get assassinated. That is the story. That is in brief my story. But it's an invitation so you all can read the book. It's called What the Desert Did Not Erase. Lo que el desierto no borró en español. Thank you so much, Diana. Let's continue with the Commissioner of Truth, Alejandra Miller. And also, because of a question that sometimes generates confusion amongst people, what is memory, what is truth, what is remembering, what is truth.
Quería preguntarte,
I wanted to ask, what is the difference between the process of remembering, for example, the ones that Helena and that Diana did, and the construction of truth that the Commission of Truth is bringing about, and what is the importance of those two and the link between them? Thank you so much. First of all, I'd like to thank Diana and Helena for their strength and their courage to putting their voice and their words and their strength so we're able to know their story and so the story doesn't repeat itself. I'd like to say that the first thing is that remembrance comes from something that happens from a subjective point. Memory comes from experience of what each and every one has lived at certain circumstances. So like it was narrated by Elena, what she felt, her experience, how she was able to contemplate it, feel it, live it. That's what's part of the memory. Oh, she's on mute. She muted herself by accident once again. Commissioner, you silenced her. Okay, there she's back again. So truth has to do with trying to identify, let's say, in what happened, the facts. What was it that happened? But for the construction of truth, memories are super important. We cannot construct or build on the truth that we are building today if we didn't have the memories and the remembrances Colombians, especially females that came to the Commission of Truth to tell us their experience, to tell us their memories and what they remembered. Through those remembrances that the Commission has, reported on, at this time, the Commissioner of Truth has approximately 2,000 and something testimonies, individual testimonies, and I've heard over 22,000 people throughout this journey, even though we're in the middle of pandemic. The Commission was able to extend their wings to territories where apparently, for example, there wasn't a lot of conflict. We would even go to places where there were conflict, quote unquote, and those silences, there's experiences even in those areas. So all of these testimonies that people are telling us that come from what they lived, these are the memories of how each and every person has lived what they went through. But those 12,000 testimonies are the ones that are giving us the elements and the instruments to identify, for example, what was, what was those patterns that started in the armed conflict. Let's say a pattern has to do with, systematic patterns, frequencies, objectives, etc. And the Commission of Truth, throughout this huge diversity, massive diversity of memories and remembrances, we are linking those patterns in order to explain to the country not only what happened or the facts of the cases. For example, in Colombia, there's enormous riches with regards to the armed conflict and memories of the armed conflict. So it's not just telling the stories, they're also known in the country, but also explaining as well in detail what's behind that, why these things happened, who benefited from these things that happened with those violations of human rights, with this armed conflict, who were the powers there, what were their interests behind this war that is so complex. It doesn't just come to a topic of war. It's not just the FARC and paramilitaries and public forces. Those are the apparatuses that are, in the disagreements. But this goes beyond that. And Diana said it. Politicians, parapolitics is a big example of that. There's political actors, there's economic actors, drug lords. It's a whole bunch of networks of interest around the armed conflict that makes everything very complex, but that also helps us understand explanations that go beyond simply some apparatuses that were just, shooting each other and that's it. There's something deeper. There's deeper responsibilities of those who, had these weapons and who killed, and those who have responsibilities. There's a call to us, for example, as a society to understand that. So in that process of building on the truth, it's and the Commissioner of Truth who's presenting a report in November. These are part of the explanations that we have to have in our reports. We are not going to be able to clarify certain cases or individual cases. It's impossible to do that with 9,000 victims. It's impossible for the commission to do that. So that's why we tell women, listen, we're not going to be able to tell you who disappeared your son, how it happened, etc. But we are able through listening through hundreds and thousands of women or 2,000 women who their kids were disappeared, we were able to identify what's the pattern that is there and how we can explain the explanations by going through certain sources, etc., that we have. So that is what we have. That is the task at hand. In the case in particular of women, we've done a lot of work when it comes to genders. Of the 12,000 testimonies that we've picked up, at least 50% of that testimonies are women and LGBT groups that have been there contributing. So the voice of women and their memories, their remembrances, multiple and diverse, that can contribute to that construction of truth that we're doing. And I believe that is part of what we've guaranteed in these past 3 years. With these multiple voices, we are able to identify, as we said before, these patterns of victimization or these patterns that happened and were not only victimization, but of multiple explanations. Then there's a process where we are now, which is analyzing and going deeper into the information that we are given from the victims, those who went through the conflict. We are also doing it with the perpetrators, the responsible individuals, but also the secondary sources, organizations that are also because they also give us information from memories. It's not just judicial. We are also, the Commission of Truth is extrajudicial. We are not asking people for proof so they can tell us their story, so that it can be valid in the Commission of Truth. That's why we also take these testimonies, these individual testimonies, with also the collective testimonies, with the reports that the organizations have given us, with the reports, previous reports that we've had from several sources, and with information that the Commission of Truth, with several difficulty, we got to say this, has had access to. For example, intelligence reports from the armed forces, etc. It has been very, very difficult to be able to get access to that information. We are working strongly to gather all that information. So once that we have all that, we are hope to tell the country and start to open up that in a nutshell of telling that truth. One question that we always ask ourselves is in the Commission of Truth, and that has to do with this explanation of the construction of truth, is how difficult and how challenging it is to build on truth so we don't repeat itself, so it doesn't repeat itself, so the conflict doesn't repeat itself. This is the only Commission of Truth in the world that is doing the work of where, you would suppose that the Commission of Truth would do so to close a conflict that wasn't closed, and that today we see dynamics of several territories in El Cauca, in Colombia, in El Chocó, in Catatumbo, how these dynamics of war repeat itself in those regions. So one fundamental question that we always ask ourselves in the Commission of Truth, what is going on in Colombia? Because even though there's peace processes and there's democratic practices like the Constitution of 1991, for example, we are not able to stop war. What are those factors of persistence that allow this war to continue? So that is, for example, the methodology of what we are doing in the Commission, and the center of our task, what we call the listening of repairing. We hope to have done the task. We want this portion of the listening for those people that, these people that are listening to the victims. They had a process of training where the victims felt comfortable as they were, as people listened to their memories, they also felt alleviated, and in some way they felt a form of reparation. And this is how we see memories and remembrance repairs itself, and how it also brings about justice. I remember in my journey of work with women historically, when they were in the peace of process in La Habana, Cuba, women, what they were asking the most for was the truth as a fundamental form of reparation. This topic of justice wasn't the center for them. Of course, forgiveness is an individual topic and subjective, and I believe you can't pressure women, people to forgive. And more than forgiving, the most fundamental thing about reconciliation in this country, it continues to be the truth, because the truth is what helps that the way to reconciliation can be solid. Just to end, I'm going to share with you all, we had a job with women that were victims, and I remember one of them saying, well, I need to forgive because I need to take off that burden that I have. It doesn't let me sleep, and forgiving will help me alleviate that. But there was another woman that would say, don't ask me to forgive, because what this that I feel, this, this anger, it's what helps me every day to wake me up from bed and to continue looking for my disappeared son. So forgiveness, it's subjective and it's not a condition. So we can advance in reconciliation, but remembering and remembrance and truth, they are fundamental, conditions. So Colombia can advance in with the journey to reconciliation, and it has to be memories and truths and transformative truths, because, and there's an enormous risk in that these truths right now, it's it's in style that believe there's multiple truths. So we start to see in that scenery that it's important that those are the responsible individuals can be a memory, a recollected memory. There's a risk there in which we cannot let ourselves go into that. It has to be memory and truth that will transform. And and war comes into play with that, and we have to contribute to that, to changes. And we hope that that report that we're building on at the Commission of Truth, it feeds itself from that memories, and it will contribute for us to transition to a path of peace with the country. Excellent. To end this portion, before we move on to questions from our guests, I'd like to ask about a topic that we usually don't talk about in these forums, but I believe it's a part that we cannot ignore. That's in the process of seeking truth and remembrances and all that. Helena was telling us that she was told at some point, be careful because you are involving yourself with powerful people, individuals. And Diana, I bet, she even said her own family told her not to get too into it because you can get in trouble. And that is still present in the individuals that, in the people that work with the Commission of Truth, when we know that there's one part of the story, one part of that testimony, and all of a sudden this comes up, the fear. Fear, without a doubt, it's an obstacle, as as in the seeking the truth, and it's not avoidable. When in these processes where there is powerful individuals, and how the violence we've seen in Colombia. I'd like to ask each and every one of you, starting with Helena and Diana, how, if you ever felt this fear, how did you transition from that? Or how did you decide to do your own research and continue, even though you were, getting threats, or knowing that there were topics that were so delicate? Why did you continue? And for the Commissioner of Truth, with the Commission of Truth, how does this reflect in the work that you do? So, Elena, if you want to start, you have each and every one of you has 5 minutes to answer. Yes, I did feel a ton of fear in the process. It's very difficult for me to just answer it. So it's just as simple as that. I believe that at the time when I broke through that silence, I was, fear was more, I had more fear of being silent. The need for people to know with what was, for example, what was saying before, when it comes to remembrances, it's also a form of justice. And that need so the world can know what happened to us. And yes, that, it was my force was bigger than fear. I had to tell my story. It was a need. And even though it was an emotional need, I also, realized that there was an ambition of rebuilding what war had destroyed, which is ethics and morals. Because if people know these stories, I'm not so sure that memory avoids things to repeat itself. I'm not sure of that, because contexts change and constellations change. But I do believe that memory can help, so we have better bases and more solid bases. And that's why for me to have that emotional need to tell my story, there's also hope in me doing something good for this country that is so hurt, Latin America. Also being conscious that my story and the one I share in the story in my book, unfortunately, is not just one story of Colombia, because this it's a story of a little girl that could be in Afghanistan, in Mexico, in Iraq, who loses her father, and then she has to go to the world where she builds a new life. And with that pain that she's holding on to. So let's say that, where that comes from, and how Colombia continues living that war, what Alejandra was saying, it just doesn't mean that it's a peace process that finished, and that's why the Commission of Truth is there. But we continue with people dying every day, and the number of people that are assassinated, so much more worse than other wars that have been declared. And yeah, I am repeating myself, but I also believe that beyond fear is that need that, the truth be known. And because of that, I said, okay, I'm not going to just, I wanted to do my own research. There is a research, what I tell from my own personal experience. And what I narrate, there's other books that mention that in forensic studies, the Commission of Truth of 2010, documents of the Department of State. And I mention this because there's something there that needs to be researched with regards to the United States' role in this. So yeah, fear is always there. It's there. Fear is always there. I cannot say it's not, but the need to tell my story is bigger. And that's my case. Thank you, Helena. Thank you so much. Diana, for you, how was it for you? I want to start out by saying that the entire time throughout the process, I felt fear. And even today, because I felt now I'm no longer fearful, because I faced a killer like this guy that was a powerful politician of the country, and a ton of other influential figures from the country. Let's say that there was courage, and it was coming from, or it was born out of, that I had lost everything. I felt that I didn't have anything else to lose, that the pain was so big. It was so big. And so at some point someone asked me, like, hey, how does it feel to lose your father? It's a question that shouldn't be asked. Losing a father or losing a loved one from any point of view hurts, but it hurts more when It has been in the midst of so much injustice and so much impunity. It's like facing all of those things at the same time. Not only the absence and the emptiness of not having a father at such a young age, but also the act of, that everyone had asked who it was, but we didn't know who it was. And then within me, I had to find out why. Not just who it was, who killed, but why. Expose that. And at the end, and that's why it's so important, the job that the Commission of Truth does, and to show, it's like a social sanction, because in some way, prison, it just doesn't, help the victims. It doesn't, murder, doesn't even, it's not something that's going to change a murder just because he's put in prison. But it's something that will heal you. It will heal you, but there will be a lot of pain as well. Because in the midst of this process of investigation, there was a ton of pain. I found out a lot of things that were very painful. For example, my father could have been saved, and he wasn't, they didn't want to, nobody wanted to tend to him at the hospital. And, they let him bleed out. They left him away at an hour and a half away from the town to the city. So he bled out. Just seeing, speaking to medical forensics, and it hurts, and you're so full of anger, and it adds more pain, but it also gives you more strength at the same time. Doing a lot of interviews, go to the places, throughout the trial, I was really scared. More than fear, through that, to the fear of the killer, it was a fear of dying, fear of having, another loved one being killed, because not only had they not killed my father, but they had also killed my uncle, who had, who was also like a father figure to me, So I gone through that twice, basically, and I didn't want to go through that anymore. So it was also that I needed to follow my own convictions, and I needed to be, if I was silent, I would reproduce that pattern. And if you stay silent, nothing's going to change. So one thing is, now, throughout this entire trial, and even today, there are still armed groups in the Guajira and in Cesar with clear influences from this man. The armed groups are a threat, but the fear is also a threat. And it's a threat because everything could remain the same, that nobody does anything. When these people are not, when we don't report them. For example, right now I'm remembering that, the speech of the priest, and when my father died, was so focused on for us to forgive. Now that I'm remembering what Alejandra, when she brought this up, the priest was saying we had to forgive, and that we shouldn't research anything. We should just leave everything like that. And he would ask us, he was asking us that, and we were so much in pain. And when we didn't even know who it was or why, and the killer had been there, he carried, the box where my father was in. And how could you forgive in the middle of a situation like this? So I believe in forgiveness. It's not good or bad. It's an internal decision, and you can't forgive if you don't know the truth, if you don't know what happened. And I believe that fear will always be there, especially when you face these structures that are so powerful, and that it isn't only influential, illegal, it doesn't have any legal influential, but it also has legal aspects to it. When you know the testimony that you were giving to the district attorney's office or the judge could be manipulated or can be used against us, because there's lack of legitimacy of a lot of these entities in Colombia. And, there's a lack of trust of who you can trust protecting entities like the police, the army. Clearly, after what happened, who can you trust? You can't even trust the own district attorney's office, because they are also corrupt because of these powerful groups. So there was a lot of distrust. There was no trust, even with the district attorney of the case. I would say, who can guarantee to me that you will investigate and you're not going to be like the other individuals? Like it takes longer for a citizen to announce and make a report. So within that process, it's very common in Colombia when it comes to bringing about a case against someone, and we're still in the middle of a conflict that does not end, and that every time there's more groups that become dispersed and that take control of the regions, precisely because the state, doesn't make itself present. Thank you so much, Diana. Finally, for the Commissioner of Truth, how do you perceive fear in the work of the Commission of Truth? One thing that comes to my mind listening to Helena and Diana, this comes to my mind, and that is that throughout many, many years, it still is an issue in the movement of women. Women from OFP and Ruta Pacífica of the Mujeres, they always say it's still better to do it with fear than not do it at all. And I think that comes a lot to the victims. Of course there's fear. And within that context of revision of this conflict, there's fear. But it does not stop people from talking or wanting to talk to the Commission of Truth. It has been harder, of course, because we've had to adapt to conditions so people can talk. There's territories where the conflict is so strong that we have to have several strategies so people can tell us their stories or testimonies, tell us what happened. Regardless, even though there's fear, people talk. Even though there's fear, people want to talk to the Commission of Truth. And in no other way can we explain how in this short period of time, in these circumstances that the pandemic has put us through, the Commission has listened to 22,000 people. And I believe that it shows precisely how much the force and how strong and how fear is there. It's unavoidable because of this, the conditions, the historic conditions that this country has had with regards to the victims, because of impunity, and the armed forces in the state. We can't avoid that fear, but even though it's so powerful how the strength and the courage of these victims in wanting to talk and wanting to share their story. And, we have two testimonies here of that. So that's one part of fear that makes it hard, but it has not stopped the task of the Commission of Truth. And the Commission of Truth also has worked with something that's super important, and that is the guarantee of guaranteeing the victims of confidentiality of their experiences, of their memories, of their stories, of what they went through. The Commission has done a process of protection of information in a way that people, are at ease, that they are not exposed because of they share certain things. And each difficulty with the conflict. But there's another fear that is very important for me to bring up, and it's the fear of having the power. Power is afraid of fear. And I think we are also going through that right now at a time where the Commission advances in their tasks and continues to work on the reports. The report in November, we received more attacks. They tried to delegitimize us before the report. So I believe that is also fear of, the power is afraid of truth. you know, what they've always looked for is always to preserve the status quo. And a transformative truth, a deep truth that, you know, pretty soon that we will be sharing with the country. You know, it also generates that other fear that makes other reacts the way have reacted on, you know, to the Commission of Truth and other things that are happening in the country. So yes, there's fear, but there is also a ton of strength and courage and the victims of with the victims of Colombia.
Muchas gracias, Alejandra.
Thank you so much, Alejandra.
Todas por las respuestas.
Thank you all for your answers.
Tenemos
We have a few questions in the chat,
y quisiera pasar
and
la
I'd like
palabra a
to
Sandra
give the
Londoño,
mic to Sandra Londoño,
una
who
pregunta
is
para
asking a
hacer la
question.
pregunta a las
So she
invitadas.
may ask the questions to our guests. Thank you, everyone, for the possibility of giving us this space. Helena and Diana for sharing their experiences. Alejandra Miller as well for being here with the reparation of memories. I was trying to point out that this event right now may be seen, but it will be reproduced. Will it be shared after today? Not only Colombians and abroad, but also second and third generations of immigrants abroad that don't have an experience of the conflict. It's the case of a lot of Colombians and FIU and other universities around the world. A question that is broad but is necessary, thinking of these individuals for Helena and Diana, and that is how these two stories that you both are telling us, they're different. They're very particular, but how do they link, you know, with regards to the literature, with the violence, political violence, what can that offer? Thinking about these second and third generations that haven't lived the conflict in Colombia, and that in some way or the other are starting to comprehend what's going on with these events, these opportunities, these dialogues. Second question, I will just leave them here right away. What reflections can we have with how the feminine role in the politics of Colombia, you know, how does that open a line of memory in that line of you know, what was talked about in the beginning, you know, from your viewpoint as women, you know, women as you, like how you are gathering the pieces of war in this, within this feminine outlook, how do these two works can be worked in a line of memory that seeks to educate, you know, the public? Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you, Sandra.
No sé si Diana o
So I don't know if
Elena
Diana or
quieren
Elena want to
hacer
jump in
preguntas.
and answer the first question.
Diana.
Diana, I believe you'd rather leave that to me. So Sandra, it's those two questions are quite long, but with regards to the first question that has to do with the second generation, what I see is that if individuals have not lived through war directly, and I'm talking about the experience with my son, for example, they live indirectly the effects of war. So for them, it's important to know what happened so they don't have that shadow, that image of Colombia: war, drug lords, deaths, corruption, everything that is known of Colombia. It's negative, you know, from outside, it's negative. That's why it's so difficult for these kids that are born outside of Colombia to identify with this. How am I going to relate to that country? But I believe that through these stories, that there's transformative stories of resilience, of demand. I believe that there is where we can rescue what war has destroyed. And that's why it is important for children to see that Latin America in general has been plagued with wars and sadness and injustice, but it also has that other face that has been lost in other places of the world. I live in Europe and I see, I don't find that here. You know, I don't find that people they have everything. They have that strength and that happiness that you only see in Colombia. That to me is incredibly. After I wrote the book, I was telling Diana and other people that I feel that I want to go back and connect with Latin America, and I need it after being so long on the outside, and I'd like to offer my children that, my son that, I'm sorry. So I don't believe they don't live, they do live it. They live it in another form. And that's why remembrance and remembering, it shows them that other face of Colombians that it's marvelous, and it's full of power and strength, and that's why what we have to show them. And another, with the other question with the peace process, one thing that I see with the peace process is that they tend to be within those two parts of the two individuals that are victims. They tend to be discussed amongst those that are victims. So for Colombians that were given that opportunity the first time, they allowed the victims to be at the center. And in some cases, quote unquote, I've heard sometimes that the victims have been put there as a mask, but the practice isn't very known. But because the peace process has been agreed amongst the victims, it's so important that we bring about that part of remembering and remembrances, that victims can give, that we can approve of their stories, that's where the secret is, the possibility of bringing about change, that has been done by the lovers of war, those that love war. So I don't remember very much, Sandra, what was the second question, but if I did not answer it, please um, ask the question again. Thank you, Helena. I don't know if Diana. Sandra spoke about of migrants, and I believe that there's a thing when it comes to something that hasn't been talked a lot about, and it's people that are in exile. A lot of individuals that are on the outside are for reasons of the armed conflict. That's because either they were displaced from their town to a city, and then they kept being persecuted, or because they could be killed. I think it's one of the crimes where most times no one really talks about it. It always talks about the forced displacement, but exile can also be a forced displacement, as it was in Elena's case. And Sandra was saying, that our stories were connected. Yes, there are two stories that are very distinctive. And they have a point where they link each other, where there's a killing of a father that really made a huge impact in our lives in different times and with different actors. But as I was saying before, many times there's talks of like, for example, there's 8,000 victims of the armed conflict. There's 280,000 homicides as a result of the armed conflict, but these numbers do not move. The importance of reading these books is not only just to know, but also to realize that the story of one victim that is told is a story of all of the victims. And as a result of the launch of my book, I've had a whole bunch of people come up to me telling me their stories and of pain, of loss. And we've seen there, in those stories, a reflection that, how similar and different the stories are. And that is the importance of reading the books. Now in February, I had a beautiful experience, because my book is being read at by a school in Barranquilla, Colombia. And I was surprised because the children were very interested in knowing, and they didn't know, they had not lived through that time, that dark time of the paramilitaries. They had lived, certain things of that, but of that nature. But finally, the history is always being told and retold. by the powerful individuals, not by so much by women. So that's why it's important not just to know by numbers or data, but also by the stories and the testimonies from that, of those victims. I don't remember the second question of peace, if she remembers it.
Perdón, Diana, disculpa. Está en el chat, pero creo que digamos
I put it in the chat, but
Diana, Elena, como tú,
Elena and yourself, you were able to connect both questions because the other question was how that feminine perspective of recovering memory, how do you open a line, how those two works, those two tasks that you both did of telling your story, how that opens up a line of remembering and memories, thinking and educating individuals to peace. But I believe with your answers, you answered that. Thank you so much.
No sé si la comisionada de pronto
I don't know if the
tiene
Commissioner of
comentarios.
Truth wants to add to that. Yes, I believe, yeah, I just want to add two elements that are super important of this topic of the second generation in exile, and that the Commission has worked, the Commission has done strong work, and that the topic of exile is visible in this last report that we're going to have in November. Something that hurt me in recognizing the topic of exile. With regards to the second generation, they end up feeling like I'm not from here and I'm not from there. It's, what is my place? What is my real place? And that topic of identity is very complex. And it's one thing that I remember the most that was that was very telling, and connecting that into the topic of what memory is and feminine memory, women remembering, but also with the topic of education in regards to peace. Elena said something that was very important, and that is, within that personal issue, it's personal and it's also transformative. And Diana said it too. Nothing is more impact. Nothing it makes more of an impact than the story that is being told of what people went through and what they lived through. When the commission started, there was a delegation of Germany that came to talk to us. There was a whole bunch of young girls, and they would tell us all through our elementary school, they would ask us to do homework on the Holocaust and World War II, et cetera, and everything that happened supposedly so we wouldn't forget. And we were like kind of sick of it. But at the end, the survivors came to visit our schools from the concentration camps, and they told us, and they went to our school and they told us, and that changed our life. One of the girls said to us, you cannot imagine what it meant to us, everything that we read, the books, the data and all that stuff. It changed our life more when we heard the survivors say it directly from their mouths, what they lived through the concentration camps. And I believe that books like Helena's and Diana's, all these exercises of memory, they are the ones that help us to educate individuals towards peace. These history books that we have, that we have to, bring them in school. Memory is fundamental in transforming subjectivity in people, and in that sense, politically as well. So I believe that that is a strong instrument, and women, what has, as it was said in the introduction, we know how to do it because of the patriarchy put us in a place of, expressing ourselves with regards to our feelings and be able to talk about that profoundly. And I believe that's why the narrative of women can generate, in many occasions, a lot of commotion, positive commotion. So we are able to do a task of transformative action. I just wanted to add that. And I hope the Commission of Truth and report on the Commission of Truth have that logic, more than the logic of history books, which are important as well, but more on the logic of a transformative truth, and taking into account people's voices that lived through this war.
Gracias, Alejandra. Sí, a Elena como
I
que
saw Elena like she wanted to say something else. No, yes and no, because Alejandra already said it. She reminded me that precisely what happened in when it was known that there was with the concentration camps, the immediate reaction was not horror, but as they say, collateral damage, like something from the Second World War. The burden that the Holocaust has, the concentration camps and the exterminations, this happened when the victims started telling their stories. It wasn't because, in the US, there was anti-Semitism, who were the ones that, discovered the camps and liberated these individuals. That's why it's so important for people to tell their story, because that's where everything connects. That's where people realize, so that could be me. This that happened to her could happen to me. And because it happened to me, it could happen to her. It's a threat to everyone. So we cannot reject these stories. That is the power of, these stories, that people can feel that it could happen to them. And that's why we have to reject it. And we have to, that's why I say it could always work to connect to a social level and give more morals and ethics to democracy. If it can repeat itself, I don't know, but at least as we, for us to realize the gravity of the situation, that it can click, that it could make us more human, so to speak.
Muchas gracias, Helena. No sé si también Diana o Alejandra quieran dejar
I don't know if
último comentario.
Alejandra or Elena want to leave a few last comments. With regards to what Elena said, I agree with what she said. Finally, you never know if history will repeat itself. If these stories are going to repeat itself, they have been repeating itself. So, remembering and remembrances and memory cannot stop. And it's not just to remember what happened. Remembrances are also to look at that mirror, and it helps create empathy, and it helps understand the life of that other individual. And very important what Elena said, it helps to think and comprehend that not because you live in the city, you cannot be a victim of war or of the conflict. You can still be a victim. So I believe these stories help to develop empathy towards others.
Gracias, Diana. No sé, la comisión.
Thank you, Diana, the commissioner.
No, yo creo que estás, digamos, dicho mucho, me recojo también en las palabras de Diana y Elena.
Yeah, everything has been said, and I agree with Elena and Diana of, the memory and remembering and the truth in order to transition to change. These are processes that take time, and the report on the Commission of Truth, it will not generate immediately a process of change, immediate process of change, but it can leave some, it can leave an outline in that process of transformation. I remember at some point, some people who worked in the Commission of Truth in Guatemala said how as years pass, that report in the Commission of Truth that they did 20 years ago will, become stronger as the years pass. It's as if today that report is it's a route. It's like a map of how, what steps we should take. But 20 years ago, it was delegitimized. It brought in a lot of conflict, and it was met with a lot of conflict. And I hope that with everything that has happened with regards to remembrances and memory that we have in the country, and this report on the Commission of Truth, that will have recommendations as well, so it doesn't repeat itself. Taking into account what Elena said, it's a process. It's going to be a long process, and that we can leave a roadmap, reflections that can help us to transition as a country to another place of this horror that we have today, where it keeps recycling, the whole war conflict, and we cannot stop war. and that discovering
esos hilos
those links
detrás de
that are
las
behind the truth,
múltiples poderes,
links of
los
power
múltiples
and,
intereses de los múltiples
interests,
poderes
multiple
locales, nacional e
powers
internacional,
from
pues
local to
para
national
poder
that we may
comprender esa
comprehend.
comprensión
And that when, as we comprehend
de lo que nos ha pasado y
of
de lo
what
que
has
sigue
happened and
pasando,
what continues to happen,
realmente nos ayude como
can help us to
a movernos un poco
move
de este lugar de
from
dolor
this
en el
place
que
of
estamos.
pain that we're still at.
Muchas gracias, comisionada, y muchas
Thank
gracias,
you,
Elena y
Commissioner
Diana,
Elena
por
and
todas,
Diana.
por todo lo
Thank you all
que
for
compartieron hoy,
everything you shared today,
orgullosamente de sus propias
very
experiencias,
generously from your own experiences,
de lo que encontraron en sus
from everything you
investigaciones,
found in your
experiencia
research,
de verdad,
and
y
remembering,
que nos quedamos
I
todos así de
believe,
poderosos
you
de
know,
escuchar
that
eso,
we are all left with how powerful
de verdad
your
son voces de
voices
mujeres
from
importantísimas,
women and
para
the
el país,
stories, for the country.
parte de la historia
It's part of the story
de todo este país.
of this country.
Muchas gracias
Thank you so
a Colombian
much,
Study Group
Colombian
por
Studies Group,
ofrecernos
for
este espacio,
making this
por
space
invitarnos a todas
possible and for
a
inviting us all
participar.
to
Y pues yo
participate.
les,
And
les dejo pues
I
primero
want to
invitarlos también
invite
a
you
todos los
all,
que se hayan
to
conectado
whoever connected.
para
Thank you
que
for,
les
connecting with us. And I invite you all to read the books and of Helena and Diana.
muy
And
fuertes, digamos,
they're very
como desde esta mirada
strong.
también muy personal
They're very
de
personal.
estos momentos históricos y estos
You would come
momentos
to
políticos
understand the
del país.
context and the history of the
También
country.
aprovecho
And I
para
also want to take advantage
invitar
to
a las personas
invite
que
the individuals
sean
that
colombianas y que
are
por causa del
Colombian
conflicto
and
armado
because of the
hayan
armed
buscado
conflict
refugio en
have
Estados
sought
Unidos,
refuge in
que si
other
nos
countries or the
ayudan a
United
contar la
States.
historia
And
al
and that they can come and tell our stories to the
para ser
Commission of
parte,
Truth and
digamos, de este proceso
become part of
de
this process of
reconstrucción
memory
y que se puedan
construction.
acercar a nosotros
With that little
y
grain
que
of
podamos
salt, you can
darles
come to
seguimiento
us,
a todas
contact us at the email for
Colombian
CSG.
Studies Group los pueden
Colombian
contactar.
Studies Group. You can link us
Y
up through
bueno,
Facebook
le
or
voy a dejar
Instagram.
a
And now I am
Diana
giving the
Ramírez de
word
Colombian
to
Studies
Diana
Group
Ramirez
para dar
from Colombian Studies Group, who will give us some last words. Thank you all.
Hola, buenas tardes.
Hello,
Muchas
good
gracias a
afternoon.
todos por
Thank you all
acompañarnos.
for
Como dice Pedro,
um,
estuvo
being here. First of all,
valioso
this was
escuchar
marvelous. Hearing your
algunas cosas
reflections and your
políticas
stories,
de nuestro
so
país.
many things that we need to learn.
Le doy las gracias
I want to
a
thank
Elena,
Elena, Alejandra,
Diana
Diana,
y a la comisión,
and
a la moderadora Michelle.
the moderator,
Y a
Michelle,
nuestra traductora que
and
hizo un
our
trabajo
translator, who did an excellent
excelente.
job.
Recibió
Excellent.
muchas felicitaciones.
We've gotten a lot of messages with regards to that. And
Parte
thank you,
de
my
este
members of
seminario
Colombian
y en
Studies
Nueva
Group,
York
FIUN in New
y
York,
pudimos poner esto
because we were able
junto
to
para
put this
compartir.
together
Y bueno, los
to
invitamos
share.
a
And we
nuestro
want to
próximo
invite you to
evento
our
que se
next
llama
event, which is called
Colectivo Feministas
Colectivo Feministas,
el día
Feminist Collective in
25 de
Colombia,
marzo a las 6 de la tarde.
25th of March at
Tenemos
6
invitadas
p.m.
a Paz
We
González,
have
Lina
guests
Quevedo,
Paz González, Lina
Sandra
Quevedo,
Solano y
Sandra
María
Solano,
Ángela
and
Orguila.
María Ángela
Y
Orguila.
para que nos
So
acompañen y
if you
apoyen
want
la
to
inauguración, les
be with us
enviamos
that day, it will be
mucha
fantastic.
información y
We
pues
will
para
send you
que nos
more
sigan en nuestras
information. And so
redes
you
y
may
para
follow
que
us on our social networks so you can keep up to date with what's going on.
muchas gracias.
Thank you so much.